If this is your first time to Vital Point, I want you to know that we're in a series called Christianity Exposed. And maybe you're watching for the first time online as well. What we've been doing in this particular series is we have been taking some of the ideas that we have about the Christian faith or some of the misunderstandings we have about the Christian faith. And what we've been doing is we've been pulling them apart and actually speaking into them from a perspective of looking at Jesus' life recorded for us in the Gospel of Mark. Some of you may not be familiar with the Bible, and there's these four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Mark is one of the Gospels that records the life of Jesus, and Mark actually records it from the influence of this guy named Peter, who was a disciple. And so Mark is essentially taking some of the moments that Peter had in interacting with Jesus, and he records them for us. Mark is one of the most fast-paced, no-nonsense type Gospels where he really paces through the life of Jesus in a way where we hear and see how Jesus interacts with people. We see how he deals with brokenness. We see the miracles. We see the feeding of multitudes of people and leftovers and all this kind of stuff. We see walking on water. Today, we are actually making a transition in our series. And the transition is going to be in Mark chapter 8, which we're going to look at in a few moments because I believe it's important that I actually set us up in a way that look back a little bit in order to go forward in our new section. So let me talk about two critical pieces that we've been talking about in the first 6 weeks. This is a 12-week series, the first 6 weeks. First thing that I want you to know is that Mark records for us in Mark chapter 1, verse 1, this phrase, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So when you look at this opening statement to the Gospel of Mark, you realize that the beginning is the extreme point of something new. It's this brand new, it's this transition moment. What is so beautiful about this and what we discovered 6 weeks ago, or 7 weeks ago now, is that this parallels the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, where it says, in the beginning God created. It's this beautiful aspect of God bringing out of the chaos, out of the confusion, this new thing called creation, the beginning of creation, where he brings the world into existence, where he brings humankind into existence. And we see that he creates out of his good pleasure and out of his love and his goodness. Anytime you read something about God creating something new, it's always, or I should say it's often attached to this idea of good. So when you read Genesis chapter 1, you see that he created and it was good. And then you see the creation of human beings, it was very good. Now, what is so incredible about this is that Mark starts the gospel the same way. In the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The word gospel, for some of you who may not be familiar, is actually a phrase of good news. So what do we have? We have Mark saying, I'm going to point you to the good news of Jesus. The whole purpose of me writing this book is so that you actually can see Jesus. But in that, the second part of the gospel and the good news is this, that Jesus came to proclaim what is called the kingdom of heaven. So you get a double dynamic to the good that is happening here. So it's pointing us to Jesus, and then Jesus is going to actually point to us and proclaim the kingdom of heaven. What is the kingdom of heaven? It is the rule and reign of God's kingdom coming into this world. We see this recorded for us in Jesus' baptism. Jesus' baptism, he comes up out of the water. He's being baptized in the Jordan River. He comes up out of the water. It says that the Holy Spirit came like a dove on him, and we hear the voice of God. And so we see this beautiful, good thing that Jesus is doing, or what God is doing through the person of Jesus. And it's this whole truth that begins to unfold and is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, the second thing that emerges for us, and as we poke through some of the miracles and the teachings and the parables, we actually have to land on the question in Mark chapter 4, verse 41, that the disciples ask about Jesus. This is so good. They experience this miracle that Jesus has done. He's calmed the water. He's in the boat. And they ask this question. And it says that they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? What a great question. Because it's a question that sets us up to realize that we all must wrestle with this. We must all wrestle with the question, who is Jesus? So if you've never encountered Jesus before, you too might wrestle with this. You we come up to Christmas, right? And we're, with all the distractions in the song and the Christmas carols that every single person loves to hear and sing. Okay, maybe not everybody. Christmas carols are rough for some of us. We actually are going to be celebrating the birth of Jesus. And so we say, who is this person that is Jesus? How do we encounter him? This church exists to point you to him. That's why we called it Vital Point. He's vital to your life. Now, what is also interesting about this is that not only those who have not yet encountered Jesus must ask this question, those of us who have followed Jesus for a long period of time must ask the same question. Why do we ask the question, you might say? You might ask. It's because of this. Over time, what happens to someone as they journey in their faith is that they can rely upon their rituals and their routines of their faith more than Jesus. And so we look at this and we say, we must wrestle with, who is Jesus? Who is he? Who is he in my life? And one of the things that happens to us over time is that Jesus becomes like this fringe character in our lives. And he has a little bit of influence, or if he has a little bit of input, he's kind of out here. And so we wrestle with, okay, who is he in my life? Just this past week, I have a group of young adults that I hang out with on Monday nights. And we're talking about life and faith. And at the end of the gathering, I said to him, listen, what I want you to do is I want you to figure out who Jesus is and fall in love with him and follow him, because I believe that he is vital to your life. It's an important dynamic, an important question that we ask ourselves. Whether you're a person of faith or whether you're not, we must all wrestle with who is Jesus. Now, when you think about what is about to happen here and you begin to see some of the dynamics of the transition in this recording of the life of Jesus, we're going to see here a very significant, powerful transition that's not only geographical, like Jesus has been roaming around Galilee and Capernaum, and then he's going to now be moving towards Jerusalem. We're actually going to see his message begins to change as well. We begin to see a fuller picture of what's going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read for you this section, and then we're going to look at some important dynamics of this transition and then apply this particular moment to our lives, and we'll see where it all lands. Okay, let me read it for you. It's Mark chapter 8, verse 31 through 38. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." All right, let's talk about this pivot moment for a second. Okay, more than a second. It's going to be a little longer than that, just so you're aware. Let's talk about this transition. This is a very interesting moment, and there's lots of debate over where section 2 of the Gospel of Mark begins. So we have chapter 1, and it leads up to the middle of chapter 8. Why is this important and why is this significant? Because in this pivot, we begin to see something clearer. Now, some believe, and there's lots of debate about this, that the actual pivot moment in the Gospel of Mark is the section prior to this. And it's this discussion that Jesus has with his disciples, and he says to them, "Who do people say that I am?" It's a great question. And they answer. Some say that you're John the Baptist, some say that you're Elijah, some say that you're a prophet. And this is a good thing, because the crowd is beginning to pick up a little bit more of who Jesus is. They're beginning to identify there's an authority and a power that Jesus has. So if someone said to you, "Hey, you remind me of John the Baptist or Elijah or some of the prophets," you'd be like, "That's a good thing. This is a positive thing. This is not a negative thing." But in that, Jesus says to them, "Who do you say that I am?" Okay, Jesus is now pushing it a little bit deeper into the disciples. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter responds, "You are the Christ." Peter begins to realize something about Jesus that he's been asking all the way along. Who is this man and who is he? Now, others would say, and this is a very interesting dynamic to the transition of the section 2, some would say, no, it's not this discussion with the disciples about who he is. It's actually the moment before this. The moment before this is Jesus actually interacting with a man who cannot see. He's blind. He cannot see. And it's found in verses 22 through 26. And it's this incredible moment where Jesus actually spits in this guy's eye. Like, if you can read it for yourself later. It's like legit. He spits in his eye. And he actually touches his eye. And then Jesus says to him, hey, listen, can you see? And he says, yes, I can see, but I see people, but they look like trees to me. Then Jesus does something else. He touches him a second time. He touches his eyes a second time, which is interesting because then he sees clearer. Here's why some would say this is the pivot point, is because the first section of Mark, things are not fully clear yet. The stories, the miracles, the parables, the healings, the brokenness, all that kind of stuff, all the dealing with the demonic people and all this kind of stuff. There is a reality of the not seeing clearly, and then we see in this moment of the double touch of the eyes, where now we're looking forward and we're about to see clearer as to the message of Jesus. Before, it wasn't super clear, now it will be. Here's the thing I want to present to you. I don't care where the transition is. And now, I don't write commentaries or theological books on this stuff. I'm not at that level. But here's the thing. I don't care where the transition is. I believe it's part of the whole transition. I don't believe it's a line. I believe it's the phasing in of this moment. It's the miracle of the healing of the guy's eyes. It's the interaction with the clarity of Peter proclaiming who Jesus is. And then he drops in this thing, I am now going to teach you some things. I love that. Because there is a progression in our understanding. And that's reality for even us as individuals. That even in our pursuit and our exploring and our growing in our faith, there are moments and times where things are not as clear as we want them to be, but for whatever reason, all of a sudden Jesus gives us an extra touch and we see something clearer. We begin to see the progression of this moment into what is happening in section 2. Because Jesus does give us great clarity. He begins to say to them, what? The Son of Man, verse 31, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Now, this is where it gets pretty heavy, and I hope you can track with me. Jesus literally sends a bolt of lightning right down into the middle of the disciples with this moment. This is a moment where he shatters their understanding of what is happening. They have had a great run up to this point. The miracles, the teachings, the parables, feeding of thousands of people with leftovers. It doesn't get any better than that. It's an amazing moment. But then Jesus drops his truth right down into the middle of their story with Jesus. I want you to think about a lightning bolt of a moment in your life where something changed. Where someone gave you information or you heard this news. Your life was going along just great. Everything was perfect. And then all of a sudden something comes in and it changes. For me, some of you know my story. I was 11 years old. I will never forget the day that a friend of ours, John Hogue, sat us down. I was 11, my brother was 6, and he said, your dad is not coming home from the hospital. He passed away. I was a little kid at that moment, and I distinctly remember it so clearly. It was like a lightning bolt. It changed everything about our lives in that moment. This moment with the disciples is almost the same vibe. It's almost the same feel. They had everything going. They thought they'd won the lottery with Jesus. And in this moment, he completely shatters their understanding. And we realize this by what Peter does with Jesus. What does Peter do? Peter pulls Jesus aside and rebukes him. Now, I don't know what this looks like. I just try to... As I read this, I try to imagine what it was like, and maybe you do the same thing if you read stories like this. I almost imagine Jesus saying this, and then Peter getting this bright idea. I need to correct Jesus. I think he's got it wrong. So what he does, he kind of goes up beside Jesus, maybe grabs him by the elbow and kind of brings him over here, away from the disciples a little bit. It's like Jesus, come on, really? I don't think this is the way it's supposed to go. Why? Why does he rebuke Jesus? Well, he rebukes Jesus because Peter has an understanding of how the Messiah was going to deliver his people, and that was through force and military might. The people of God were oppressed by the Roman Empire at this point, and we realized that they were praying for a Messiah. They were praying that they would be released under the oppression, and in his mind, it was going to be a military force and might, not by the Messiah going down the path of suffering and death. Are you kidding me? Peter pulls him aside and rebukes him. See, I want to just interject something here that I hope will help us. See, sometimes we have an idea of what the Christian faith is, and that's attached to this idea that the Christian faith is about making a decent person good or better, right? We have this idea that if we could just follow some of his teachings, some of Jesus' teachings, I'll be a better person, okay? Now, let's get real. Obviously, if we followed some of his teachings, we would, like on forgiveness, compassion, how to treat our enemies. I mean, these are legit, really good things that we could attach ourselves to, and we could probably see some things get more positive in our lives. But what we see in this moment is a realization that the Christian faith is not about making a decent person better. It is literally about a person going to a cross named Jesus, going into a tomb and rising 3 days later so that we may have life. Now, I'm a bit ahead of myself. Not really. We'll come back to that in a minute because we need to jump back in on some of our assumptions. See, Peter is watching this moment unfold, and he has an assumption about what the faith was about, and Jesus shatters it. Says, no, it's not that, it's this. Now, this is where the double rebuke happens. Because as I read it for you a few minutes ago, what does Jesus do? Jesus actually looks around, makes sure the disciples are watching, and then he says what? Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. And then he literally says, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Okay? Let me talk about this for a second. There's a lot going on in this phrasing. A few weeks ago, David, who was our host this morning, he's our community connections pastor, and he's our site leader in Exeter. He preached a message on Jesus casting out demons from a demonized man into a bunch of pigs. You can go back and listen to that for yourself at another time. What you need to know about what the dynamic of what all this means is that there is an opposition to the message in the kingdom of heaven, which is Satan, the enemy of all things of God and of Jesus. We see this progression in the first half. We see how whenever Jesus encountered someone who's demonized, and we see it right from the wilderness where he encounters Satan, and then we see it from people who are demonized by evil spirits, and they would throw the person down on their knees before Jesus, and they would actually speak to Jesus, and then Jesus would rebuke the evil spirits from the demonized person. And the account that David talked about a few weeks ago was he cast them into a herd of pigs. What is important to understand is that in this moment when Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, these guys knew exactly what he was talking about. These guys had seen Jesus rebuke evil spirits and cast them out. What's happening here? Peter has lost sight and has only, when he confesses about the Son of God, he has only used his words to say who Jesus is. He doesn't have the depth of who Jesus is yet. Okay, stay with me on this. There's a few reasons why Jesus would rebuke Peter, okay? First reason is this. Peter has lost sight of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, okay? He actually uses the phrase, get behind me, Satan. What he's saying is that, Peter, if you choose to stand in the role of Satan in my journey to the cross, you have no part with me. Okay, you have no part with me. Up until this point, the enemy has been standing in the way, right? We've talked about this. Every time there's something moving forward, the enemy tries to short circuit what Jesus was about to do. And in this particular incident, the enemy uses one of the disciples to stand in the way. We must understand this. This is a bit of a side note, but we must understand that the enemy's role in the kingdom of, and opposition to the kingdom of heaven is always about deception, division, confusion, chaos, fear, and discouragement. We can go on and on and on. He's the father of lies. And so even to this day, we must understand that there's always things that are going to be in the way of the advancement of God's kingdom in this world and in your life. And so right now, what we have in this moment from Peter's life, he's actually being used in this moment to stand in the way of what Jesus was about to do. And that's why Jesus says to him, get behind me. He's lost perspective on what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Because the second thing that emerges out of this moment, and this is so key, when I discovered this week, I was like, oh, this is good, and this is a good part of the message. When Jesus actually says to him, get behind me, Satan, do you know what that actually is? It's actually an invitation to Peter. It's an invitation to take his proper stance as a disciple of Jesus. What he's doing in this moment, he's actually saying to Peter, I'm giving you an opportunity to get behind me and have your rightful position as a disciple of mine. Peter had this invitation in Mark chapter 1, verse 17. He says, come follow me and I will make you become fishers of men. This is an unbelievable moment because first time the invitation comes, Peter gives everything up and he follows Jesus. He goes after all the things that Jesus had invited him into. And in this moment, he's lost sight of what it means to be a disciple. See, a disciple is one who orients their life towards a rabbi, to a teacher, and your life is influenced by the authority of that particular rabbi's life. And that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Peter hears in a moment, in this invitation, to come to the right position as a disciple. He had actually stepped out of line with Jesus and put himself in front of Jesus, thinking that he knew better. So, what is key to this for us, and maybe this is the application point of this, Jesus doesn't write Peter off. Okay? Think about that for a minute. Jesus doesn't write Peter off. The invitation to follow him again is an invitation of grace, forgiveness, and an opportunity to repent. It's an opportunity to repent of his false way of understanding his relationship with Jesus. Now, I say that because I need that. Maybe you don't, but I do. I need to hear every once in a while, hey, put me back in the right position in your life. Stop treating me as a fringe character in your faith journey. Put me back at the center of who I am in your life. I was with, I can't remember if I said this already. Yeah, double services, I keep forgetting what I've said. I was with a bunch of young adults and falling in love with Jesus. Did I say that already? Kirsten, did I say that? Okay. So I'll say it again. It's this moment where I was with them and I was just saying, this is the point of the invitation of putting Jesus at the center of your life. It's a critical piece of understanding that he is vital and he is the point of faith. Now, because I already said that, I don't need to unpack that any farther. Sometimes I get lost in my thinking in my head. But here's the thing that we begin to realize, is that when Jesus says this to him and we see the dynamic of what it means to get Jesus in the right position in our lives again, in the right spot in our lives again, Jesus actually reveals where Peter has actually gone wrong. We see this in the verses from Mark 33. He says this, you've set your mind on the things of God, not on the things of man. Okay, so now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. Now we're getting to this place where Peter was a little bit offside. Peter needs to understand that there has to be a shift in our understanding of who Jesus is so that the relationship with Jesus can form us into the image of Jesus. Peter had his mind focused on the things of this world, not on the things of God. His mind and his thoughts were focused on just what he thought the message of Jesus was to be. He didn't have his mind set on the things of God. Peter needed to shift away from the natural pattern of human thinking to a divine way of thinking. Peter was limited in his ability to comprehend truly what Jesus was about to do, and he needed to have it changed and shifted away from that. Peter's mind earlier, what did he say? You are the Christ, you are the Messiah. But did he truly understand what that meant? He needed to have his mind shifted and changed. I want to share something with you that I think will help us. When a person comes to faith in Jesus, there's this moment or there's this time when you're making this commitment to Jesus and you enter into a relationship with him. What ends up happening with that is a transition in the way you begin to think. There's a focus in our lives. Let me take you to a couple of verses, some verses that this guy named Paul wrote in Colossians. And this is going to help us with the thinking pattern. Paul writes this letter to this church at Colossae, and it's this rural setting church that he had never visited before, but he was writing to them to help them understand knowledge and truth, because what was actually going on behind the scenes is there was a guy that had infiltrated the church, and he was trying to teach them that you can actually know truth and knowledge from advanced intellect and an awakening of self, promoting of self, defining your own truth and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting because that's what we have today in the culture we're living in. It was happening in this moment where Paul writes to the church at Colossae. But then he says this. He says, "If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on the things that are above, not on the things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God." See, this is the whole aspect of understanding what begins to unfold in our lives. We begin to realize we enter into, you're raised with Christ, you have this new life hidden in Christ, and then that dynamic of the relationship begins to come fuller into the picture as our minds are captured by looking upward. It is this seeking the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand. That is the authority and the power and the victory that is ours as we focus upward to the things of God. See, we can so easily get distracted by the things of this world, right? It's just a natural part of who we are. We, as human beings, get distracted by things around us that want to draw us away from the things of God. What we have here is Peter giving us an example of how easy it is to get distracted and lose sight of actually what God is doing. What we're seeing here in this moment is, and in the Colossians passage as well, is that Jesus is saying that your mind is to be fixed on the things above, on the things of Jesus. But as you consider it, it's not just a simple one-time thing. It is an ongoing process of seeking the things above. It's the desire. It is the intent. It's the purposeful living faith that's focused upward. Matter of fact, Jesus even said this. Matthew 6:33. "But seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." That is so powerful and life-changing when you realize it. Because when you look at your faith, you realize that you never stop being a seeker. You never stop being a seeker of the things of God. And as we progress and as we move forward and as the roots of our faith get stronger, it's often because we've allowed ourselves to keep our eyes focused upward, not downward. Now, as I thought about this and started navigating this week and thinking, okay, what does this actually mean? Like, how do I focus upward? How do I let my mind fix on the things above, not things on earth? And how does this begin to unfold? So I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to go for broke. I'll give you 3 or 4 ideas that you can use to fix your eyes on things above. First one is this. When a thought enters your mind that is not of God, when a thought enters your mind and you just know this is not of God, this is obviously from somewhere else, what I want you to do is I want you to capture the thought, which means you don't ignore it. I want you to capture it, and then I want you to put it to death. All right? I want you to literally crucify the thought. Right? Some of you are like, what in the world? What are you talking about? It's when you do that, what you're doing is you're not allowing this thought that's not of God to actually take root inside of you and develop a pattern of thought that is opposed to God. So what you do is you capture it, you take it, and then you put it to death. And if it boomerangs, which they do, right? We all know this, they boomerang, they come back to us sometimes. What you do is you take it, you grab it, and you crucify it. You put it to death. You execute it, right? This is what we do with the thoughts that are not of God. The second thing I would say is this, is find a few Bible verses and memorize them and put them on a loop. Like, put them on repeat. I do this at night. When sometimes I can't sleep. my mind gets racing in the middle of the night. And when it starts racing, it gets going into things like worry and anxiety and all the things that we all are facing these days. When I begin to quote verses, I have a few memorized in my head, I actually start memorizing, and what happens is I go back to sleep, which means the Bible can put you to sleep. So just so you know, okay. I only do these things to see if you're still with me. We can take these things and we put them on repeat because they actually create a new pattern of thought. Some people say it's replacing a lie for a truth when you think about the Bible and the power of it. The third thing I would say is this. Remove the patterns in your life that distract you from focusing on Jesus. Right? Remove the patterns. Is it the social media scroll? Right? Is it that constant scroll that you just, you get thumb cramp because you just keep scrolling? Is it maybe not visiting the shopping sites online that tell you you're not going to be happy unless you buy that particular thing, right? Maybe stop scrolling or stop visiting those sites. Or maybe it's getting rid of some friends in your life that drag you down. I say that very carefully because I just don't want you to start ditching all your friends. But I just think it's important to say, who am I surrounding myself with that helps me stay focused? Helps me stay focused upwards. See, here's the thing. When our minds are not captivated by the things of this world, what begins to happen is we begin to shift our thinking towards a kingdom mindset, not an earthly mindset. Human mindset versus a divine mindset. And when that begins to take shape in us and transform us, we begin to see things completely different. We begin to see the realities of the kingdom of heaven busting into our workplaces. When someone's gossiping about you and slandering you in your workplace, you see it completely different. And rather than trying to defend yourself, you begin to pray for that person. You begin to speak hope into that person. When you begin to have a kingdom mindset, it changes how you raise your children or raise your teenagers. I wish I did better at that often, but you know what I mean. Like there's times when teenagers take us to our limit, right? That's why I have no hair. It changes how we spend our money, how we see our time, how we prioritize things in our lives. This is so important because this encounter between Peter and Jesus is revealing to us so many powerful truths that sometimes we get our faith upside down and backwards. And we believe that we can tell Jesus how to answer our prayers. But he says, no, I just want you at the center because you are following me. In this moment, Jesus says, I begin to teach them in verse 31. It's a transition, it's the pivot towards the passion of Jesus and the desire it is for him to go to a cross. See, Jesus doesn't want to do a bait and switch with us. He's not going to say, I give you this good life and I give you these better things, but oh, by the way, just so you know, it's going to come through sacrifice. It's going to come through picking up your cross. Because that's ultimately where Jesus ends. In the section of Mark chapter 8, he doesn't kind of gloss over it. He actually looks at the crowd and the disciples and he says, hey, if you want to follow me, you got to pick up your cross. You got to deny yourself and follow me. Jesus says, if you want to live for the patterns of this world that will force you into a mold that is not of me, you can. You can go ahead, but you will lose your life. But if you want to find it, it comes through the sacrifice. One person said it this way. There's a kind of life that leads to death, and there's a kind of death that leads to life. There's a kind of life that leads to death, and there's a kind of death that leads to life. This moment is such a key, critical point that Jesus is making in the Christianity Exposed series, is that there is a shift that is moving us towards the ultimate message of the Christian faith, and that there is one who loves you deeply. There is one who longs to be in relationship with you, that desires to walk with you, that desires to give you the power to face the opposition in your life. One who will give you great freedom. See, freedom doesn't come from the removal of authority and restrictions in our lives. That only leads us to a slavery to self. But freedom to live in the reality and the love and the grace comes from an invitation. He says to the crowd, if you want to follow me, come follow me. Pick up your cross and walk the way that I have walked. Lay down your desires and your dreams so that I can give you new ones that are technicolor, the ones that will bring you life and life to the full. This is a moment where Peter needed this. And I wonder if some of us need it too. That maybe we have neglected to see the beauty and the wonder and the awe of the Christian faith through the lens of who Jesus is, and we've reduced it to rituals, we've reduced it to rhythms, and they are important and good, necessary, yes, absolutely. But maybe it's today where we are recognizing that it's putting him in his right position again, that position of authority and the position of victory that we have in this life and the next.